September 15th, 1944. The invasion of Peleliu began under a scorching Pacific sun, an operation intended by Admiral William Halsey to be bypassed, yet insisted upon by Admiral Chester Nimitz and General Holland Smith. This was a catastrophic command decision rooted in flawed intelligence, costing the United States Marines some of their highest casualty rates of the war. Compelling evidence. The primary objective was to seize Peleliu's critical airfield to protect General MacArthur's flank during the Philippines invasion. Intelligence predicted that the island's defenders, the Japanese 14th Infantry Division, could be overwhelmed in just 3 days, assuming the intense naval bombardment had destroyed the enemy. This pre-invasion assessment was fatally wrong. The Japanese defenses, under the brilliant command of Colonel Nakagawa, had shifted entirely from beach defense to a deep, integrated defense utilizing the island's naturally rugged terrain and coral caves, a decisive tactical innovation that was completely overlooked by U.S. analysts. Insightful expert, quote, "The commander of the 1st Marine Division, Major General William Rupertus, famously guaranteed a 3-day victory, a clear example of operational hubris that ignored the changing statistical realities of Japanese defensive doctrine. Vivid example. The opening naval bombardment, consisting of shells from 6 battleships and 5 cruisers, lasted for 3 days. U.S. officers assumed this massive firepower had sterilized the island, but the Japanese, hidden in deep reinforced caves, simply waited for the barrage to lift, emerging untouched and ready to fight. The rich explanation for this failure is that the Japanese command had learned from their defeats at Tarawa and Saipan, abandoning suicidal banzai charges in favor of a brutal, protracted defense designed not to win, but to inflict maximum politically demoralizing casualties on the Americans. Hubris blind strategy. A failure to update defensive doctrine based on enemy innovation ensures catastrophic underestimation. The U.S. command prepared for an amphibious assault, but received a war of subterranean attrition. The island's terrain, dominated by the porous, jagged coral ridges of the Umabrogal Mountains, later nicknamed Bloody Nose Ridge, was the perfect environment for the new Japanese defense, ensuring maximum human cost. Compelling evidence. Nakagawa did not commit his troops to fixed positions. Instead, he utilized the porous coral rock to create an interconnected network of over 500 caves and tunnels, equipped with interlocking fields of fire that focused every weapon on the beaches and subsequent invasion corridors. This defensive system neutralized American advantages in naval fire support and maneuverability. The caves were reinforced with steel doors, allowing them to withstand direct hits from naval guns, turning the invasion into a grueling cave-by-cave struggle of extermination. Insightful expert, quote, Marine Colonel Louis Chesty. Puller, though fighting fiercely, was shocked by the lethality of the Japanese positions, recognizing immediately that the official 3-day estimate was a fantasy. "It was the most brutal fighting I have seen in the Pacific," he noted. Vivid example. The initial landings on White Beach and Orange Beach immediately ran into concealed resistance. Japanese 20mm and 47mm anti-tank guns, hidden in pillboxes, decimated the landing craft and stalled the Marine advance, turning the beachhead into a costly, immediate stalemate. Text. The rich explanation for the island's lethality is that the coral topography provided natural protection for the Japanese defenders, turning the small island into a multi-layered fortress where every American advance was met by concealed, concentrated, and perfectly pre-sighted fire. Terrain dictates tactics. When defensive forces utilize natural topography effectively, they neutralize the enemy's material superiority. Peleliu's caves became a geological nightmare for the Marines. The catastrophic resistance shattered General Rupertus's 3-day prediction immediately, forcing the 1st Marine Division into a brutal, grinding battle of attrition for the airfield in the deadly Umabrogal pocket. Compelling evidence. The struggle for the airfield, though captured relatively quickly, cost the Marines hundreds of casualties and consumed the first week of the operation, confirming the massive underestimation of the Japanese defense. Once the airfield was secured, the Marines were forced into the primary Japanese strongpoint, the steep, heavily mined, and cave-riddled Umabrogal Ridge. This battle consumed the bulk of the division's fighting strength in a desperate, slow crawl over unforgiving terrain. Insightful expert, quote, "The fighting on the ridge was described by Marine PFC Eugene Sledge as pure hell, unadulterated hell, noting the extreme heat, the lack of water, and the constant, invisible threat posed by the cave network. The psychological burden of fighting an unseen enemy in extreme heat was immense." Vivid example. The initial assault on the Umerbrogel required the Marines to resort to terrifying new tactics, using flamethrowers to seal cave mouths and satchel charges to blast open entrances. This required infantrymen to approach to within inches of the enemy, leading to staggering close-quarters casualty rates. Text. The rich explanation for the prolonged battle is that the Japanese defense was designed for protraction and attrition. Every cave required a separate, costly assault, consuming the Marines' time, specialized explosives, and, most importantly, their fighting manpower. Attrition breaks armies. When an enemy defense is designed to simply inflict maximum cost rather than achieve tactical victory, the invader must pay a crippling price. Peleliu became a meat grinder designed to drain American manpower. The incredible heat and the unforgiving tactical situation led to a severe crisis of morale and physical collapse within the 1st Marine Division, confirming the high human cost of the command decision to invade. Compelling evidence. Temperatures routinely soared above 110 degrees Fahrenheit, and the water shortage was acute, leading to mass heat exhaustion and dehydration. The battle was fought with as much intensity against the environment as against the enemy. The fighting was so prolonged and casualty rates so high that the 1st Marine Division, one of the U.S. military's most storied fighting formations, was rendered entirely combat ineffective within the first month. Its regiments had to be rotated out, having suffered crippling losses. Insightful expert, quote, General Rupertus, who had guaranteed the 3-day victory, was removed from command shortly after the battle due to the immense human cost and the utter failure of his initial assessment. The brass had to admit the intelligence was fatally flawed. Text vivid example, Marine Corps historian Samuel Eliot Morrison summarized the horrific statistical reality. The 1st Marine Division suffered over 6,500 casualties in just 30 days of fighting. This was a direct, unsustainable loss of veteran fighting power, forcing the Army's 81st Infantry Division to be brought in to finish the fight. Its text. The rich explanation for the catastrophic losses is that the Marines were forced to fight the Japanese enemy on their terms, up close, in confined spaces, and against defenses designed to kill one American soldier for the loss of one Japanese, a new, brutal defensive equation in the Pacific. A quest cost changes strategy. An unacceptably high casualty rate forces a strategic reassessment of the entire campaign. The staggering losses at Peleliu became a grim lesson for all future Pacific Island invasions. The final, grinding destruction of the Japanese defensive pocket fell to the Army's 81st Infantry Division, confirming the complete exhaustion of the elite Marine force and securing the ultimate, if belated, victory. Compelling evidence. The Japanese pocket in the Umerbrogel Ridge was finally eliminated through relentless, systematic warfare that focused on destroying the subterranean defenses rather than simply attacking the surface positions. The U.S. forces adopted new tactics, massive use of tanks to fire directly into cave entrances, engineer teams utilizing specialized explosives like C2 and TNT to collapse tunnels, and constant, overwhelming artillery support to keep the Japanese defenders pinned down. Insightful expert, quote, Colonel Nakagawa, recognizing the inevitable defeat, finally sent a last transmission. The position is lost. We will fight to the last man. He subsequently burned his regimental colors and committed ritual suicide, ending the formal resistance. Text vivid example. The resistance was so fierce that Japanese soldiers continued to fight in isolated caves for weeks after the island was declared secured. The final organized pocket was destroyed 74 days after the landing, nearly 25 times longer than the initial estimate. The rich explanation for this final, extended resistance is that the Japanese defense structure did not require resupply. It was a self-sustaining system of death, designed to bleed the invader for every possible day and prove the high cost of invading the Japanese Empire itself. Attrition is terminal. The enemy's willingness to fight to the last man requires a complete strategic shift from maneuver to systematic extermination. Peleliu was a victory defined by the total destruction of the enemy, not the seizure of territory. The ultimate legacy of Peleliu remains a painful statistical reality and a dark lesson in the failure of intelligence and the strategic cost of war. Compelling evidence. The 74-day battle resulted in over 10,000 U.S. casualties, killed, wounded, or missing, against nearly 11,000 Japanese killed, resulting in a devastatingly close casualty ratio, a sign of the success of the new Japanese defensive doctrine. Critics argue that the entire operation was strategically unnecessary, as Admiral Halsey's successful bypass of the neighboring islands Yap and Ulithi rendered the Peleliu airfield strategically redundant months later, confirming the fatal flaw in the initial command decision to invade. Insightful expert quote, "The immense cost of the battle sparked intense debate within the U.S. military leadership regarding the value of such costly frontal assaults, directly influencing the subsequent invasion tactics used at Iwo Jima and Okinawa." Text vivid example. The 1st Marine Division, after its crippling losses, did not see combat again for over a year. The High Command had sacrificed one of its most valuable fighting forces on an island that quickly lost its strategic relevance, confirming the tragic absurdity of the final cost. The rich explanation for the battle's grim legacy is that Peleliu proved that the Japanese were adapting to the overwhelming American material superiority by exchanging ground for blood. A new, terrifying defensive posture that the U.S. forces had to systematically overcome for the rest of the Pacific War. Cost defines legacy. A strategic victory that comes at an unacceptably high and unnecessary cost serves as a permanent warning against operational hubris. Peleliu remains a painful monument to unheeded intelligence and the failure of strategic foresight. The core of the catastrophe was the battle for the Umabrogol Ridge, a jagged coral mass that General Rupertus had dismissed, but which Colonel Nakagawa had transformed into a self-sustaining, multi-layered fortress. This was the moment the 1st Marine Division was systematically broken by the relentless, invisible resistance. Compelling evidence. The Japanese defensive positions were not trenches but deep, interconnected caves, many reinforced with concrete and steel that provided complete protection from the devastating initial naval bombardment. This shift in doctrine meant that the overwhelming American superiority in artillery and naval guns was effectively neutralized. Every advance had to be paid for in a brutal, up-close infantry assault against a concealed, fortified firing slit. The fighting became a desperate, close-quarters slugging match. Insightful expert, quote, Marine PFC, Eugene Sledge, who fought on the ridge, wrote with chilling clarity, "It was pure hell, unadulterated hell. The heat, the smell, the constant close-quarters threat. You never saw the enemy until he was shooting at you from a hole in the ground." This quote captures the immense psychological burden of fighting an unseen enemy. Vivid example. The American assault devolved into a terrifying war of specialized ordnance. Marines were forced to abandon standard infantry tactics and rely entirely on flamethrowers and satchel charges, requiring the attackers to approach to within inches of the cave mouths, leading to staggered, shocking casualties from concealed fire. The rich explanation for this grinding brutality is that the Japanese defense was designed for protraction. Each cave was a separate defensive node that consumed time, explosives, and, crucially, high-value marine manpower in a process of systematic extermination. Nakagawa's primary objective was cost infliction, not territorial defense. Defense dictates cost. When a subterranean defense system is fully integrated, the invader must pay the crippling price of systematic, close-range extermination. The Umabrogol caves turned the Marines' advantage into a terrifying vulnerability. The struggle for the ridge was exacerbated by the appalling tropical conditions, confirming that the enemy was not just the Japanese, but the very environment itself. Compelling evidence. The battle was fought in temperatures routinely exceeding 110 degrees Fahrenheit, causing rapid dehydration and mass heat exhaustion. Water discipline became a life-or-death priority, sometimes leading to frantic, desperate behavior among the troops. The porous coral rock meant that any rain instantly washed away the topsoil, turning the landscape into a lunar environment where the dead lay exposed and the stench of decay was constant, compounding the psychological trauma on the fighting men. Insightful expert, quote, "The combination of tropical conditions and the relentless fighting broke the 1st Marine Division faster than any force they had yet encountered. The division's fighting capability was effectively spent within the first month, a devastating statistical reality that necessitated the rotation of entire regiments. Vivid example. The logistical failure to provide adequate water and heat treatment services directly contributed to the casualty numbers. For every Marine hit by Japanese fire, another struggled with debilitating heat stroke, confirming the dual enemy they faced, the Japanese guns and the unforgiving climate. Text. The rich explanation for the physical collapse is that the U.S. Command, rooted in the 3-day estimate, failed to provision for a sustained high-intensity jungle war. This logistical failure was a direct consequence of the initial intelligence error, ensuring the soldiers fought at a physical disadvantage. Logistics fails first. An insufficient logistical plan, rooted in operational hubris, exposes the combat troops to crippling environmental disadvantages. The heat of Peleliu was a silent killer as effective as any Japanese gunner. The mounting casualty lists and the failure to achieve the predicted timetable forced a massive, painful reassessment of U.S. doctrine, confirming the irreversible loss caused by the initial intelligence blunder. Compelling evidence. After only 30 days, the 1st Marine Division, one of the finest fighting forces in the world, had suffered over 6,500 casualties, a rate deemed unsustainable. This forced the High Command to acknowledge that General Rupertus' estimate was a complete failure. The decision to commit the Army's 81st Infantry Division to finish the fight was a tacit admission of this failure, confirming the total exhaustion and qualitative destruction of the veteran Marine regiments by the Japanese attritional strategy. Insightful expert, quote, "The Marine Command was forced to confront the fundamental flaw. Their pre-war doctrine of achieving quick victory through overwhelming naval bombardment was obsolete against the Japanese's new cave defense system. The enemy had adapted to American material superiority. Vivid example. The new Army tactics, focused less on frontal assaults and more on systematic extermination, included dedicated, sustained application of heavy artillery fire directly onto the entrances of the Umurbrugol pocket. They focused on collapsing and sealing the caves using massive explosive charges, fighting the battle geologically rather than tactically. The rich explanation for the strategic shift is that the U.S. Command finally understood that the objective was not to seize territory, but to systematically destroy the Japanese formations in their entirety, a prolonged and brutal process that required extreme patience and vast quantities of ordnance to ensure the final, absolute destruction of the enemy's fighting capability. Doctrine must adapt. The enemy's successful innovation demands an immediate, radical shift in one's own tactical doctrine. Peleliu became the bloody classroom where the U.S. learned how to fight the Japanese's new war of subterranean attrition. The legacy of Peleliu provided a stark lesson for all future Pacific operations, leading to a crucial, painful statistical reality about strategic necessity. Compelling evidence. Subsequent planners for the Iwo Jima and Okinawa invasions learned from Peleliu's catastrophic casualty ratios. They radically increased the pre-invasion naval bombardment time and prioritized the use of specialized flamethrower tanks and engineer teams over conventional infantry assault. Furthermore, critics highlighted the fact that Admiral Halsey's successful recommendation to bypass the nearby, strategically irrelevant islands, Yap and Ulithi, proved that the invasion of Peleliu was likely a tragic, unnecessary sacrifice of thousands of lives and a veteran fighting force. Insightful expert, quote, "Historians often cite Peleliu as a classic case study in unnecessary attrition, where the cost far outweighed the objective's final strategic value. The cost was judged to be militarily excessive and politically demoralizing. Vivid example. The fact that the island's airfield lost its strategic relevance shortly after the invasion began underscores the tragedy. The vast amount of blood and steel poured into the island achieved a goal that quickly became obsolete, cementing the battle's grim reputation. The rich explanation for the battle's grim legacy is that Peleliu proved that the Japanese were willing to fight an absolute war of blood for time, forcing the U.S. military to confront the true, terrifying cost of invading the Japanese home islands themselves. Cost defines legacy. A strategic victory that results from fatal intelligence failure serves as a permanent, painful warning against operational hubris. Peleliu remains a monument to the failure of strategic foresight. The slow, grinding destruction of the Umurbrugol pocket forced the U.S. forces to abandon traditional infantry assault entirely, pivoting to a brutal, specialized engineering war. This was a logistical and tactical admission that the Japanese defense system could only be destroyed, not seized. Compelling evidence. The primary weapon became high explosives, delivered by specialized units. Engineers utilized vast quantities of C2, TNT, and naval demolition charges to collapse cave entrances and seal tunnel networks, creating an estimated 500 individual kill zones that required tailored destruction. The focus shifted from killing Japanese soldiers to physically sealing or collapsing their geological fortress. This systematic destruction required enormous amounts of explosive ordnance and consumed American logistics teams as much as the combat infantrymen. Insightful expert, quote, "Marine flamethrower operators and demolition men faced the highest casualty rates on the island, as their jobs required them to approach to within inches of the enemy's firing slits." One veteran described the mission as a one-way ticket to hell, underscoring the lethal nature of the close-quarters work. Vivid example. The introduction of the M4 Sherman tank equipped with the Aronson flamethrower proved crucial. These tanks could project jellied gasoline deep into cave systems, creating an inferno that asphyxiated or incinerated the defenders, forcing the few survivors into the open where they were instantly eliminated by concentrated fire. Text. The rich explanation for this reliance on specialized weaponry is that the Japanese had neutralized the superiority of American small arms. The only effective weapons were those capable of physically altering the coral environment, fire and massive explosives, confirming the high statistical cost of neutralizing subterranean defense. Specialization ensures survival. When the enemy holds an absolute defensive advantage, victory relies on specialized engineering and overwhelming firepower, not infantry maneuvering. The U.S. destroyed the island to take it. The physical act of fighting on the coral ridges inflicted a relentless, cumulative psychological burden on the Marines, transforming the battle into a personal, desperate struggle for sanity. Compelling evidence. The continuous exposure to extreme heat over 110 degrees Fahrenheit, the perpetual stench of decaying bodies, and the constant, invisible threat from the Japanese cave network induced severe combat fatigue among the veteran troops. The fighting was so prolonged and localized that many Marines were forced to spend days within feet of dead comrades and enemies, blurring the line between combat and trauma, leading to high rates of immediate psychological collapse, shell shock. Insightful expert quote. The Marine units suffered from the psychological terror of the unseen enemy. Troops constantly had to watch their backs as Japanese soldiers, hidden in interconnected tunnels, frequently reappeared behind secured American positions to launch grenade attacks and ambushes. Vivid example. The acute water shortage exacerbated the crisis. Marines were forced to drink contaminated water, leading to illness and debilitating thirst, making the physical fight against the enemy almost secondary to the internal fight against dehydration and exhaustion. This created a statistical reality of non-combat casualties that rivaled enemy fire. The rich explanation for this psychological toll is that the battle was designed by Nakagawa to maximize fear and protraction. The Japanese did not care about holding the ridge. They cared about making every foot of advance so painful and terrifying that it shattered the resolve of the American fighting man. Terrain and terror break men. A defense that weaponizes fear and environmental hardship can inflict catastrophic losses on the enemy's morale. The psychological toll of the Yuma Brogel became a lasting scar on the 1st Marine Division. The crippling losses and the duration of the fighting exposed the enormous logistical failure of the Peleliu operation, creating a crucial, surprising insight. The immense tonnage of men and materiel poured into Peleliu was strategically unnecessary, confirming the tragic absurdity of the initial command decision. Compelling evidence. The strategic objective was to seize the airfield for bomber support in the Philippines campaign. Yet, Admiral Halsey's simultaneous success in bypassing other strongly held islands, Yap and Ulithi, demonstrated that the airfield at Peleliu was strategically redundant before the Marines even landed. The U.S. command spent 74 days and over 10,000 casualties, securing a piece of land whose ultimate strategic value was quickly minimalized by the success of operations elsewhere. A profound case of unheeded intelligence and rigid operational planning. Insightful expert, quote, post-war analysis confirmed the worst fears of critics. The island simply wasn't worth the price. The immense statistical cost paid by the 1st Marine Division was a colossal error in strategic prioritization. Text vivid example. The logistical effort required to support the 74-day struggle was immense. Millions of pounds of ammunition, explosives, food, and water had to be constantly shipped to the tiny island, consuming valuable shipping tonnage that could have been used to support the primary Philippines invasion. The rich explanation for this overcommitment is that the command structure of the time prioritized the elimination of all perceived threats in the Pacific, failing to accurately weigh the relative military cost against the objective's final strategic benefit. The invasion was fueled by operational dogma, not strategic necessity. Cost over benefit. A strategic operation that proceeds despite evidence of tactical redundancy is driven by fatal operational rigidity. The unnecessary expenditure of life and materiel at Peleliu remains a painful indictment of command priorities. The cost of Peleliu directly influenced the final, desperate invasions of Iwo Jima and Okinawa, creating a pivotal thought. Provoking advice point. The failure of traditional doctrine at Peleliu served as the ultimate, bloody classroom, forcing a radical shift in U.S. invasion tactics. Compelling evidence. planners for the subsequent invasions abandoned the concept of the short, sharp assault. They adopted a prolonged, systemic approach, increasing the pre-invasion naval bombardment from days to weeks to maximize the destruction of defenses. Furthermore, the Marines prioritized the systemic use of specialized flamethrower tanks, Satans, heavy artillery, and dedicated demolition units to deal with the inevitable cave defenses, ensuring that infantry were no longer used as the primary tool for bunker reduction. Insightful expert, quote, "The lessons learned from Peleliu's catastrophic casualty ratios directly informed the decision to utilize these engineering methods aggressively at Iwo Jima, saving countless infantry lives. The cost of Peleliu was not entirely wasted. It paid for the lives saved in future battles." Text vivid example. The tactical failure of General Rupertus's 3-day guarantee ensured that future generals would never again underestimate the Japanese capacity for defense, setting a new, higher threshold for operational caution in the Pacific. Text. The rich explanation for this doctrinal shift is that the U.S. command finally accepted the new statistical reality of Japanese resistance. The enemy would not break, and therefore, their defenses had to be destroyed by systematic, overwhelming engineering power before the infantry was committed. Learning from blood. Catastrophic failure in one theater forces a rapid systemic change in military doctrine for future operations. Peleliu's pain became the protective shield for the subsequent invasion forces. The final, brutal toll on the 1st Marine Division remains the core of Peleliu's tragic legacy, confirming a final, definitive statistical reality about the War of Attrition. Compelling evidence. The division sustained over 6,500 casualties in just 30 days of fighting, a rate that eliminated its combat effectiveness and rendered it unable to participate in future major actions for over a year. This qualitative destruction of a veteran, high-value unit was an irreversible strategic loss. While the U.S. could replace the steel of ships and tanks, it could not quickly replace the irreplaceable experience and cohesion of the seasoned Marine units lost on the ridge. Insightful expert, quote, "The scars of Bloody Nose Ridge were not just physical. Historians emphasize the lasting psychological burden of the battle on the survivors, many of whom faced lifelong trauma from the unique intensity and unrelenting nature of the cave warfare. Vivid example. The sample. Army's 81st Infantry Division, which relieved the Marines, continued the fight for another 44 days, suffering an additional 3,000 casualties to eliminate the final isolated pockets of resistance, underscoring the relentless Japanese commitment to the last man. The rich explanation for the lasting pain is that the battle was a pure, unadulterated war of attrition where the enemy's goal was solely to inflict casualties, achieving a devastatingly close casualty ratio that was utterly unacceptable to the American command. Qualitative loss is terminal. The destruction of veteran fighting formations represents an irreversible loss of combat experience that cannot be quickly replaced. Peleliu consumed the qualitative edge of the U.S. amphibious forces. The long, drawn-out nature of the fighting created a geopolitical footnote that affirmed the tragic irony of the initial objective, leading to the ultimate personal anecdote of the island's sacrifice. Compelling evidence. The Japanese forces, following the final order to fight to the last man, maintained resistance until November 27, 1944. However, the last two Japanese holdouts only surrendered in April 1947, over 2 years after the war officially ended, unaware the emperor had yielded. This absurd duration, 74 days official, 2.5 years actual, highlights the profound success of Colonel Nakagawa's defensive doctrine, a system designed for indefinite resistance that transcended the battlefield itself. Insightful expert, quote, "The ultimate tragedy, often cited by historians, is that Peleliu did not materially hasten the end of the war. Its immense cost was paid in the blood of the 1st Marine Division for an objective that was soon forgotten in the strategic sweep toward Japan. Vivid example. The massive cemeteries on Peleliu serve as a permanent, grim reminder of the price of unheeded intelligence. They stand as monuments not to victory, but to the thousands of young men sacrificed in a battle that arguably should never have been fought, a painful scar on the honor of the U.S. military history. The rich explanation for the battle's tragic legacy is that Peleliu remains the ultimate case study in the failure of strategic foresight, a warning against rigid doctrine, and a testament to the brutal, relentless cost of fighting an enemy committed to total annihilation. Warning signs are costly. A strategic decision that discounts enemy adaptation ensures maximum, unnecessary sacrifice, Peleliu remains the price paid for operational dogma in the Pacific. The strategic legacy of Peleliu, therefore, rests on its value as a negative example, its statistical reality serving as a permanent lesson for all future military planning. The immense expenditure of American blood and materiel on a small, insignificant rock proved that the age of the quick, easy amphibious assault was over, replaced by a prolonged, brutal war of engineering and attrition. Compelling evidence. The battle provided a crucial, early indication of the sheer scale of the fighting and casualties that would be required to invade the Japanese home islands, directly informing the later, terrifying projections for Operation Downfall. The profound losses demonstrated the enemy's willingness to fight to the last man, leading to the eventual, agonizing debates within the U.S. command that prioritized an alternative to a full-scale invasion, a debate that would ultimately lead to the use of the atomic bomb. Insightful expert quote, "The memory of Peleliu, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa formed the final, terrifying piece of the statistical model used by American planners, confirming that a direct invasion would cost millions of lives. The ultimate argument for ending the war quickly by other means." Vivid example. The small, blood-soaked coral ridges of Peleliu, therefore, hold a significance far larger than their size. They stand as a permanent monument to the failure of intelligence, the price of attrition, and the relentless courage of the American fighting man against a fanatical, adaptive defense. The rich explanation for the ultimate legacy is that Peleliu remains one of the most painful and controversial battles of the Pacific War, a tragic reminder that even the most powerful industrial nation can be brought to a standstill by an enemy willing to fight without surrender, at any cost. Never forget the cost. The most painful defeats often provide the most profound lessons for the future. Peleliu remains a permanent warning against the hubris of military certainty. The brutal reality of Peleliu was inextricably linked to its unforgiving environment, creating a vivid scenario of combat in an absolute hellscape that left deep, unseen scars on the survivors. Compelling evidence. The island's geography, primarily composed of ancient, razor-sharp coral, tore apart boots, skin, and equipment with relentless efficiency. Every step was a struggle, and even falling could lead to debilitating injuries. This coral, combined with the extreme humidity and temperatures routinely exceeding 110 degrees Fahrenheit, created a living oven where water became more valuable than ammunition, and heat-stroke casualties often outnumbered those from enemy fire. A stark statistical realities of the duel. Battle fought. Insightful expert, quote, Marine PFC, Robert Leckie, a survivor of Peleliu, wrote with chilling clarity in Helmet for My Pillow, "There are times when I think I am back there, still trying to climb that ridge. The sun, the thirst, the smell, it never leaves you." This quote underscores the profound and lasting psychological burden of the environmental warfare. Text vivid example. The battlefield quickly became a lunar landscape of shattered coral, churned earth, and the exposed dead. The ground became so pulverized that fresh graves were often uncovered by subsequent shelling, adding a macabre layer to the fighting and stripping away any pretense of dignity in death. The rich explanation for this environmental toll is that the Japanese defense was designed to weaponize the terrain itself. By forcing the Americans into close, exposed combat on the coral, the Japanese ensured that the environment would inflict casualties and wear down morale as effectively as their guns. Environment as weapon. When a defensive strategy successfully weaponizes the natural environment, it inflicts a dual and relentless toll on the invader. Peleliu's heat and coral were as deadly as any Japanese bullet. The logistical nightmare of supporting troops in this environmental hell was immense, creating a relentless thought-provoking advice point about the non-combat burden of extreme conditions. Compelling evidence. Supplying the front line required vast numbers of dedicated personnel to hand-carry water, ammunition, and medical supplies over the treacherous, coral-strewn terrain, often under constant enemy fire from unseen caves. The casualty evacuation system struggled under these conditions. Wounded men had to be laboriously carried back over the same treacherous ground, often for hours, delaying critical medical attention and contributing to higher mortality rates for severely injured Marines. Insightful expert, quote, "The Marine Corps later documented the extreme challenges of medical support on Peleliu, noting that the combination of intense combat, extreme heat, and difficult terrain pushed their logistical and medical capabilities to the absolute breaking point." Text vivid example. The limited number of suitable landing beaches and the constant enemy shelling meant that unloading supplies was a dangerous and slow process. This bottleneck further exacerbated shortages, leading to rationing of even basic necessities like water and medical bandages for the frontline troops. Text. The rich explanation for this logistical struggle is that the initial command decision of a 3-day battle meant planners drastically underestimated the scale and duration of the support needed. This initial hubris led directly to a cascading series of logistical failures that impacted every aspect of the operation. Logistics fails under duress. An insufficient logistical plan, rooted in operational hubris, breaks under the pressure of unexpected duration and extreme environmental conditions. Peleliu revealed the fragile underbelly of an unprepared invasion force. The devastating effectiveness of the Japanese cave defenses at Peleliu exposed the critical limitations of conventional American naval and air support, creating a crucial, surprising insight. Overwhelming Allied firepower was largely neutralized by a defense that simply disappeared underground, forcing infantry into a terrifying close-quarters struggle against an invisible enemy. Compelling evidence. The 3-day pre-invasion naval bombardment, involving battleships and cruisers firing thousands of shells, was rendered ineffective. The Japanese, sheltered in their deep, reinforced caves, suffered minimal casualties and simply waited for the barrage to lift before resuming fire. This negated the single greatest advantage of the American amphibious assault: the ability to soften the objective with massive preparatory fire, turning a supposed advantage into a colossal waste of ordnance and a tragic miscalculation of the enemy's resilience. Insightful expert quote: Marine commanders often expressed frustration that they could not effectively target the Japanese. "You can't bomb a hole in the ground," became a grim truism, highlighting the failure of traditional air and naval assets against the subterranean defense. Text. Vivid example. Even after the landings, dive bombers and fighter planes struggled to find targets. Japanese anti-aircraft guns were dug into cave mouths, firing and then quickly retracting, making them virtually immune to aerial retaliation. The skies, though dominated by U.S. aircraft, offered little tactical advantage against the enemy's hidden positions. The rich explanation for this neutralization of firepower is that Colonel Nakagawa's doctrine was brilliant in its simplicity, a defense designed to absorb, rather than repel, the initial blows. By eliminating observable targets, he forced the Americans to fight a battle of costly, slow infantry extermination. Defense defeats firepower. A subterranean defense system that effectively neutralizes preparatory bombardment forces the invader into costly infantry-led extermination. Peleliu became the graveyard of conventional naval air doctrine. The desperate measures taken to overcome the invisible enemy led to the widespread use of particularly brutal and psychologically scarring tactics, creating a painful statistical reality about the nature of close-quarters cave warfare. Compelling evidence. The primary method for reducing caves involved engineer teams and infantry, using flamethrowers to incinerate hidden defenders and satchel charges to blast cave entrances shut, often entombing the Japanese inside. This method was horrifically effective but incredibly dangerous. Flamethrower operators and demolition men became high-priority targets for Japanese machine guns and snipers, leading to exceptionally high casualty rates among these specialized units, a direct consequence of the tactical shift. Insightful expert quote: "The psychological toll of these tactics was immense. Marines engaged in cave flushing operations often described the grim realization that they were not just killing soldiers, but entombing living men, a brutal and dehumanizing aspect of the combat." Text. Vivid example. Japanese soldiers, driven from their caves by flamethrowers or lack of water, often emerged for final, suicidal bonsai attacks or threw grenades from concealed positions, forcing the Marines into a constant state of high alert and close-quarter savagery. 27. Explanation for this brutal reality is that both sides were fighting to the absolute extreme. The Japanese were committed to a fight to the last man, forcing the Americans to adopt equally absolute measures of extermination to achieve their objective, confirming the escalating brutality of the Pacific War. Extremes demand extremes. When an enemy commits to a fight to the absolute last man, the invader is forced to adopt equally absolute and brutal methods of extermination. Peleliu was a laboratory of close quarters, dehumanizing warfare. The immense and unexpected cost of Peleliu had profound strategic repercussions, extending far beyond the island itself and directly influencing the final, agonizing decisions of the Pacific War. This was the moment the statistical reality of invading Japan itself became terrifyingly clear. Compelling evidence. The casualty ratios at Peleliu and later Iwo Jima and Okinawa provided the U.S. High Command with grim projections for Operation Downfall, the planned invasion of the Japanese home islands. These projections estimated American casualties in the millions. This catastrophic forecast, a direct result of the bloody lessons learned on Peleliu, became a crucial argument in the agonizing command decision to explore alternative means of ending the war, ultimately influencing the deployment of the atomic bomb. Insightful expert, quote, "Historians widely agree that Peleliu, though a smaller battle than Okinawa, contributed significantly to the cost-benefit calculus of invading Japan. The willingness of a small Japanese force to exact such a price foreshadowed the potential for unparalleled bloodshed. Text vivid example. The decision to bypass strategically insignificant islands, initially advocated by Admiral Halsey but overruled for Peleliu, became standard doctrine for later Pacific operations. This acknowledged the tragic mistake of sacrificing lives for non-essential objectives, confirming the ultimate, if belated, lesson learned. Text. The rich explanation for this strategic shift is that Peleliu proved that American industrial and military might could be temporarily bled dry by an adaptive, fanatical defense. The U.S. military learned that sheer numbers alone could not overcome an enemy willing to fight to the absolute death in fortified positions. Cost dictates policy. Catastrophic casualty projections, derived from bitter battlefield experience, compel political and military leaders to seek alternative, even revolutionary, means of ending a war. Peleliu contributed to the decision to use the atomic bomb. The enduring legacy of Peleliu, often overshadowed by larger and more decisive battles, remains a profound personal anecdote about the human cost of unheeded warnings and operational hubris. Compelling evidence. The battle produced more medals of honor per capita than almost any other Pacific engagement, a testament to the individual bravery required to overcome such an unforgiving defense, but also a grim marker of the extreme sacrifice. The survivors of the 1st Marine Division carried the lifelong scars, physical and psychological, of the Bloody Nose Ridge, their experiences becoming a quiet yet powerful testament to the unseen costs of even a victorious war. Insightful expert, quote, "Peleliu remains a battle often overlooked in popular history, yet its lessons were among the most brutal and impactful for U.S. military doctrine in the Pacific. It was a bloody, costly education that changed the way America fought the war." Text vivid example. The desolate, coral-strewn landscapes of Peleliu today remain largely untouched, a natural monument to the thousands of lives consumed there. The stillness and isolation serve as a stark contrast to the unimaginable ferocity of the combat that once raged across its ridges and through its caves. The rich explanation for Peleliu's unique legacy is that it embodies the tragic irony of war, a battle fought with immense bravery, staggering sacrifice, and ultimately, for an objective whose strategic necessity evaporated almost before the first shot was fired, leaving behind only the enduring memory of its human cost. Memory serves as warning. Battles fought for objectives of questionable strategic value leave a lasting legacy of tragic sacrifice. Peleliu stands as a poignant reminder of the ultimate price of military miscalculation,